Last week, I talked about what a healthy relationship is from Dr. Kempler's perspective. Dr. Kempler was my mentor, a pioneer in family therapy and couples therapy, is known for really bringing relationally focused gestalt therapy into existence by his focus on relationships, both the therapist's relationship with his clients and obviously those members of a family or relationship or couple. Today, I want to talk about what I consider some reasonable and unreasonable expectations in a relationship. I'm working on a new book right now that's on emotional sobriety and relationships, and it's called Room Enough for Two. And you've heard me talk about that before, is that when I'm immature or my differentiation is low, then my consciousness is very much occupied with how things should be. So I live my life really by really honoring, this tyranny of shoulds that exist in my mind. And these shoulds translate into rules about how things are supposed to be in a relationship. And so when I'm undifferentiated, there are more rules for room, or there's more room for rules than there are for people in a relationship. I'll say that again, it's a tongue twister. When I'm undifferentiated, rules permeate and saturate the relationship. There's no room for people. It's all about what should be and how we should be and how you should act, and there's all kinds of rules and regulations. As we become more mature, as we develop some emotional sobriety, we let those things go. As Dr. Greenwald said, that if I'm not able to enjoy and support the full expression of myself, how can I enjoy and encourage you to have your full expression of who you are? Well, I can only do that if I don't bring in all of these rules. But we're invariably going to have them. I haven't met anybody that is rule free yet. I'm a lot closer to that in my life today, but there's still some very, very deep expectations that show up and are typically related to unresolved issues, especially trauma in my life. And I think that when we first come into this work in emotional sobriety, all the low-hanging fruit is right there in our consciousness, and we're able to identify those expectations. But as we clean that up, or as we strip those low branches of all that, those expectations, then the ones that are up higher in the tree are a bit more difficult to get at. And typically, it's going to take some situation in your life that triggers those expectations. So just be aware of that. But today I want to propose a concept, if you will, a model for us to kind of evaluate if our stance in a relationship enhances the encounter that we're having with those people we're in a relationship with, or do they diminish the relationship? Anything that brings life and richness and authenticity to a relationship is something that will enhance that relationship. Anything that subtracts from that, meaning things that go on inside of us that make us want to control the other person and have rules about what's okay or not okay, are going to diminish from our encounter. It's going to subtract from its authenticity, from its aliveness, from its spontaneity, from the curiosity that's involved, and excitement and enjoyment that takes place when two people connect without rules. Well, you've heard me talk about before that emotional sobriety is an honest and appropriate relationship to reality. So I want to talk about some things that are reasonable And when I say they're reasonable expectations, I mean that they are based on the reality of a relationship. An unreasonable expectation is going to be like an unenforceable rule that's not based on the reality of a relationship, but based on a fantasy or some kind of a myth that we've swallowed whole about how a relationship should be. So let's take unreasonable expectation number one. We are adults, and therefore we should be able to communicate like adults and tell each other what we like and what we don't like. There used to be a big movement back in I think it was in the 70s, and it was on assertiveness training. In fact, there was a great book out then called Your Perfect Right, and it gave you your 10 um, declarations, right, of your right to be able to speak your mind and say no, so to speak, because that's what assertiveness was back then. It was to correct the fact that a lot of people could say yes but couldn't say no. Well, what we learned through that whole thing was it's not just a matter of saying no that's a problem. It's a real question that we have a hard time identifying at times and being able to talk about what's important to us, especially as a relationship becomes more and more and more and more important. If your level of maturity or your level of differentiation does not keep pace with the increasing importance of your relationship, the difference between how important that person is and your ability to hold on to yourself is going to create all kinds of challenges in that relationship. Now, the fact that we've achieved adulthood chronologically or in terms of our age does not guarantee maturity. I mean, I imagine in this group, if we took a survey of how many people feel that your emotional maturity equals your chronological age, I think there'd be very few of us that would say that they are correlated perfectly, because they're not. So what is the reality? If we cannot expect someone to be able to communicate what they like and what they don't like, what is the reality? What we could call a reasonable expectation? A reasonable expectation would be that we have a difficult time telling each other what we like and don't like, telling each other what we want or don't want, or what we will and what we won't do. We have a difficult time doing that because very few people can support themselves that cleanly and say, I don't want to do this. They feel an incredible pressure to cooperate in a relationship, and even more so, an incredible pressure to compromise, which for so many people means giving yourself up and doing what the other person wants you to do, doing the other person's bidding. Well, as I mentioned last week, compromise is a very cheap form of cooperation. If cooperation is going to be rich and if it's going to enhance a relationship, it has to be grounded in what is our truth or our truth. It has to be grounded in what I want and don't want, what I like and don't like, what I will and what I won't do. As Dr. Kempler said to me one time, and it did bring tears to my eyes at this point because I had never heard it and I had never felt that I had this right. He says, there's nothing more important, Alan, than what you want or don't. Wow. I didn't have that kind of self-esteem. Do you? Are you able to just say it and feel you have a right to do that? Because that's an important component of self-esteem, is us feeling worthy of love and worthy of success and worthy of being able to speak our mind. So if we accept that it's an reasonable expectation that people are going to have difficulty, and that's the reality of the situation, then when we hit trouble, we're not going to object to it and now lay on this on our partner. If they're struggling, you should be able to tell me those things. Instead of now falling back into the shoulds, we can now say, instead of you should, of course we're having this difficulty. It takes a lot of maturity to be able to support yourself that way and to be able to ask for what you want. To be able to say what you'd like and don't like. To be able to say, I will and I won't. And to support that. Now, one of the things that I see, and I've done it, and I see it happen over and over and over again in relationships that cause so much trouble, is we do not integrate what we know to be true in terms of the patterns of behavior that exist. This couple I was working with the other day, this guy's wife knows that her husband has a very difficult time saying things to her that he's upset about. And so what happens is they go on living and like acting like that that everything's all okay. We call it a pseudo mutuality until about a couple months go by, and then all of a sudden a little thing happens and he blows up. And it's completely disproportionate to whatever the event was, because it has nothing to do with that event. It has to do that he's been swallowing a lot of the things that he doesn't like that he has not talked with her about. So, what's the solution when you encounter a situation like that? If you see a pattern like that, then don't just sit passively by waiting for the pattern to now become, a reality again. She could go to him, or they could even set up a time where she checks in with him at night, or he checks in with her, or they just set up where it's mutual. Hey, is there anything that went on today that you're upset with me about that you're having a hard time talking to me about? Is there anything that you didn't say to me that you need to say? And so, what we can do is if we base the relationship on the reality of who we are, not on an expectation that because we're adults we should be able to talk to each other, we can build in these kind of concepts, if you will, this process, so that we can prevent some of the things that happen because we have difficulty in this area. So the unreasonable expectation is we're adults, therefore we should be able to say what we like and what we don't like. The reasonable expectation is not many of us have developed our personal language to that point and are able to support ourselves to be able to say that directly. And if we're struggling with that, we don't need to lay a should on somebody. We need to figure out what we need to do to either support ourselves or to give that other person the support until they can support themselves to be able to have nice, what we call clear, clean, and direct communication. And that's why personal language like I like and I don't, I want and I don't want, I will and I won't, are cornerstones of a healthy, clean, direct communication. Number two, understanding each other should be easy if we love each other. Well, interesting. First of all, it's where it sometimes imbue love with magical properties that it does not that do not exist. But the reality of this is that nothing could be further from the truth. for a lot of different reasons that understanding each other is quite challenging and in some cases almost impossible. Excuse me. Let's explore that from a lot of different angles. I think some of you have probably heard the term of mixed marriage. We used to use that term, what more popular in the 50s and 60s, where someone that was, let's say, white married someone that was black, or white married someone who was Hispanic. That there were these cross-cultural things and that people were trying to put together a relationship. And there's no question that in those situations, because of our cultural differences, is that really being able to put yourself in somebody's shoes can be quite challenging. And therefore, understanding when somebody talks about a fear, that it may not be exactly the way that you experience that. What we realized was that every relationship, whether it's racially mixed, religiously mixed, or otherwise, is a mixed marriage because every family has its own culture. And so even if I marry someone who's, let's say, the same race as I am, it doesn't mean that I'm going to understand when that person talks about love, what that person means. This was really illustrated well in the love language book that came out, The Five Languages of Love. And when people talk about love and wanting to be loved, they can mean very, very different things. And I love the book from that point of view because what he said is you cannot assume that when one person talks about love, that they're talking about the same thing that you are. But that doesn't only exist around love. It exists around a lot of different things. Somebody, if you're trying to be helpful with someone, they may experience that help as a put down. They may think that what you're saying is you're not capable of doing it, so I have to do it for you. And you're coming from a place, no, I just want to do it because I care about you. If you don't understand those differences, it's going to create a lot of problems. Now, couple that with what I said about unreasonable expectation one. If I have trouble telling you what's really going on with me, I'm now, in terms of us understanding each other, I'm throwing another monkey wrench into that whole machinery. If I'm unable to communicate what's important to me and talk to you in a clean, direct way about what I want and what's going on and what I'm experiencing, and that's what personal language is, right? It's the ability to navigate, that those close, intimate conversations. If I'm unable to do that, how can you understand me if I'm not able to clearly explain myself to you? If I'm unable to name certain things that I'm experiencing? So a lot of this has to do with the kind of, first of all, my level of maturity. The more mature I am, the more aware I am of what I'm experiencing, the more I can now describe the phenomena, maybe even label it so I can talk to you about it in a better way. The more undifferentiated I am, if you ask me, hey, what are you experiencing right now? I can legitimately say I don't know at times because I've never paid attention or I was discouraged to stay taking a look at what was going on. Now, for fear that I'm depressing you on how difficult the relationship is, what this is going to do is to help you navigate the territory much better. Because once again, if we have trouble in this, our first response should be, of course we are. Let's see what we can do to figure this out. Emotional sobriety is about focusing on the solution and not blaming anyone. And I love to operate from the fact that we're all bringing the best we've got to any situation. And rarely is it enough. And that's why we got to keep growing along these lines. Okay, so number one, we're going to have difficulty talking about what's important to us. Number two, we're going to have difficulty understanding each other. So what do you think number three will be? Well, number three, the unreasonable expectation. If you love someone, you will respect that person's differences. That respect will just somehow automatically happen because you love that person. The reality is the exact opposite is true. Most couples have a tremendous difficulty respecting each other's differences. Well, how come? How come respect becomes so challenging? So let's go back to what we talked about in terms of maturity. When our maturity is low or we're undifferentiated, differences become a threat to togetherness and connection. I will say that again. When our maturity is low, differences become a threat to connection and togetherness. And what we're going to do is try to pressure, or what we're going to do, not try, we're going to pressure our partner to think and feel and act the way that we want them to, which is similar to how we are. If you do what I say you should do, then we're going to be close. That does not create intimacy. When you're undifferentiated, it feels like that brings you together, but it really doesn't because what it's doing is fusing two people. And true intimacy is based on two separate individuals coming together, having what Martin Buber described as an I to thou experience, where I am presenting who I am to you, I'm being authentic, real, and I'm having the courage to be able to reveal myself, and you're doing the same. And I'm not having any expectations about how you're supposed to be, but I'm rather open to who you are and seeing what that means between us. You can only do that if you raised your consciousness. If you're still undifferentiated, you will not be able to appreciate the other person for who they are. You're going to want them to be what you want them to be. You're going to want them to do what you want them to do. There won't be any room for them doing what they're doing and you appreciating it. And that creates a lot of trouble in relationships. So we're going to have trouble talking to each other, telling each other what's important. We're not going to understand that. And then because we're not going to understand it, we're going to have trouble respecting these differences, especially if our maturity is low. The great thing about emotional sobriety is that in order to have emotional sobriety, you're going to need to raise your level of maturity. We've got to grow up. That's the way Bill talked about it. Number four, and this one really gets to a lot of people. The unreasonable expectation is that a good relationship is based on trust. And because you love someone, you should trust them. Wow. I've seen that cause so much trouble. What is the reality here? Well, the reality is that we trust each other much more than we should. True trust needs to be grounded in the reality of who each of us are and not on some ideal of how we should feel in a relationship or how we should feel if we love another person. The myth behind this is that trust is unilateral, that I just give you trust. Well, authentic trust, true trust is not unilateral. True trust is a result of how we are with each other. It's bilateral. Someone said to me at one point, he said, "Do you realize that when two knights met on the road back in medieval times, that they stuck out their hand to shake hands? And you know why they shook hands? Because when they offered that person their hand, they were showing them that there was no sword in their hands. And therefore, at that moment, you could trust that that encounter would be safe." True trust only occurs when someone is trustworthy of you giving them the trust. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone try to trust someone who is not trustworthy, and then they get mad at the person for betraying their trust. But isn't it at least foolish for us to trust someone who cannot trust themselves? You see, that's why I said I think that we give away trust way too easily because we feel this pressure that you should be a trusting person. And yet, if you trust someone that's not trustworthy, you're not being loving. You're setting yourself up for a terrible disappointment and for some incredible tragedy. Number five, unreasonable expectation is that since we are adults, we should be able to discuss as adults and negotiate our differences. Well, to negotiate your differences in a good way, where you're coming up with what I'd like to consider as a win-win solution or a mutually satisfying solution, means that you're going to have to be able to present to the other person what's important to you and respect that person's differences. And you can see, based on what I've said already, the infrastructure for doing that is not there unless we do a hell of a lot of work on ourselves. So the reality of this is few of us really know how to negotiate in a mutually satisfying way. We are stuck in a win-lose drama in which we either relentlessly strive to stay on the winning end of the proposition or resign and become the perennial losers. That's the reality of it. It's going to take a lot of growing up and a lot of what we call grinding. And that's the way that we think about struggling with our differences is two people come together and they grind. Now that means that you're going to need to be willing to feel tension in the relationship. And that's another thing, in addition to everything I've just said about what makes this hard, is the fact that we want to avoid being uncomfortable. Well, struggling sometimes to get to a place where we find a mutually satisfying solution means facing some discomfort, struggling and hanging in there until and enduring that discomfort because we have faith that it's going to be meaningful to our relationship and strengthen it. But few people are willing to do that. We avoid discomfort. We want things to be easy. We have all of these ideas that we tell ourselves that make this incredibly challenging. And number six, and we'll have one more, number seven. Because I'm an adult, I know how to function in a relationship. Wow, really? Well, I don't know about you, but I sure, if somebody was passing out the book on the guidelines on how to function in a relationship, I sure wasn't in that line. I did not get my copy. The reality is that we're all ignorant and incompetent in relationship matters. We don't know what we don't know. And I used to think being ignorant and incompetent was something to be ashamed of. Today, I realize that it is something that can set me free. In fact, I say all the time, when I really could start to own how stupid I am, I got a lot smarter. When I own how ignorant I am, I start to learn more. I start to open myself up because remember, change is paradoxical. We change when we own the reality of what's going on, when we own who we are, not when we try to be something we're not. But so many of us act like we know what we're doing in a relationship because, who would want to be in a relationship with someone who's so incompetent? So I got to somehow put on a face. I got to put on a mask that says I'm much more than than I think I am, or I think I should be. And that becomes problematic because now you're not falling in love with me. You're falling in love with this image I'm trying to create about who I am. And this is why so many relationships end up after 5, 6, 7 years. We used to call it the 7 year itch. But today we say you hit a period of being disillusioned because the other person is not the person that you thought they were. And you're not the person they thought you were. And hitting that place of being disillusioned, it's difficult, it's painful, it's challenging, it provokes a lot of anxiety, but it is so important for people to embrace it because now your relationship has a chance to get on much more, a better foundation, a foundation that's grounded in reality, not on fantasy. And finally, we come to the last unreasonable expectation. But there's a lot more, but we're going to just do seven tonight. Since I am one half of the person I want to be, and you are one half of the person you want to be, together we will make a whole. Wow, how many love songs are based on that? Relationship mathematics do not work like that. One half plus one half equals one half in a relationship. There's going to be holes in our functioning. A partner can't make us whole. A partner can aspire us towards this goal, but they can't do it for us. And in relationships, one plus one equals one, not one plus or one half plus one half equals one, as it is in mathematics. So we don't want to find someone that's going to complement us. We want to find someone who's going to inspire us through their honesty and through their love to encourage us to continue to become what we can be. And our job is to do the same if we love someone, to inspire them to walk to take that path and walk that path and take that journey. So, with that being said, let me stop and invite my dear friend and colleague, Tom Rutledge and Tom Potash, both of you into the room. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hey, what's the good news?
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, the good news is that this talk today was sponsored by Eli Lilly. And if you send Tom Potash your email address, you will get a free prescription of Prozac.
Well, I keep going back to what your, premise has been for emotional sobriety is if I don't recognize that there's trouble, right? I won't begin to grow, right? Trouble is not always trouble. It just means there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
So seeing this listed out was room for trouble. The one thing which I'll just throw out there and you and Tom can run with it or not is you know I have had trouble with this concept of I'm in recovery, I'm a spiritual person, like I should trust everyone. You say we trust too easily. I should let go of my my personal needs or my own demands and turn it over way too easy. So like it sets up for a lot of these things that you called out here, where without doing the work, I'm just giving myself up, right? I'm bypassing a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Right on. Mr. Rutledge, you look
Yeah,
tense.
well, I can't do what you do. It's like I mean, it's almost like a foreign language to me. It's like I don't know how to speak in objective terms about relationship, about this is the way it needs to be, or that's the way it needs to be, or this is bad and that's good. It's like everyone's just, I mean, individual therapy is this way too. You know this. It's like, like what was it Carl Jung said, for every client I have I've invent a new therapy. But more than ever, I mean, and I do lots of couples relationship work, and it's like I mean, man, there are there are never there's always unique in every relationship where I could say individuals sometimes seem to have the similar starting point. Relationships have their own starting point, and it's like, and some of them are in bad shape, and some of them in good shape, and whatever. But it's like, yeah. Anyway, I um
Well, listen, Tom, you're beating a drum that I think is very true. See, what we're really talking about is the process involved in how two people meet each other. And what
mhm.
works for those two people is unique for them,
Yeah.
whatever it means for them. And that combination is unique in the world because they're unique in themselves.
Mhm.
There's no other you in this world. There's no other me in this world. And when we come together, and I think that was the point of this, is to let go of ideas about how things should be, and let's get on dealing with what the reality is of who we are.
Right. And I think one of the things that reminds me of too is a lesson I learned early, fairly early. I probably could or learned it earlier as a therapist. Is when I would be frustrated with clients, individual clients I was having. I had a supervisor who helped me see that my expectation, talk about unrealistic expectation, and it was benevolent. It was like I wanted these people to have what I had. I wanted them to, and I'd been working my ass off for years in therapy. Like I said, and what this person helped me realize is everybody's doesn't isn't wanting that, and relationships are that way too. It's like sometimes people come to me with a relationship, and it's very practical work. They need certain things. They want certain things kind of remedied and problem solved and stuff like that. We can do that. And certainly, anytime somebody talks to me, they get an opportunity to work on, we go beyond that. But I mean, I don't know if there is an ideal relationship. It's like one of the things that, and I know I'm just kind of all over the place here, but it's like when Dee Dee and I we worked together for a little while, and did group therapy together, and we did an intensive week-long program together. And we made a decision when we started working together that if it ever felt like it was going to threaten our relationship, we would quit working together. Um, so we quit working together. And I can honestly say, I don't know what Dee would say, but for me, I would say it's the closest I ever got to a relationship ending. This is a relationship ending. Was we were so different
My
in what we were doing. Yeah. But one of the, so this reminds me of the thing that, and this just comes back up, is because we worked together for a while, people would come to us and say, why don't you all do a presentation on this, or why don't you write about this? And it's like, that's one place that we both had total agreement on. It's like, oh, we're not here to tell anybody else how to do any of this. It's like this is so personal and so subjective. So anyway, I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm sitting there, and of course I wrote a book about relationships. So it's not that I don't have some things to say, um, but this will be interesting in this conversation as we go along um, because the word where I lost my place in the book, but it was like there's um, several places in here where part of the heading is rule. So I do talk about rules in a relationship, reasonable rules in a relationship, and I think we talk about the same thing. I think you just call them reasonable expectations.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I don't want to get, I don't, I realize I'm often in danger of just becoming lost in the semantics, and I don't want to do that. Um,
well, I love
yeah,
the
I
I
got,
love
I got to work on this. I don't know.
I love to play with language too, Tom. I know that you do. And Alan used a word called disillusionment, right? We become disillusioned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in order to become disillusioned, I had to have been illusioned to begin with. I was in an illusion
Yeah.
that that these rules were going to work, that these expectations were supposed to be met. So, as the fog of the
That's
illusion
good.
starts to fade away, then I'm faced with, what's next.
Well, what's one of the biggest myths is that love will conquer all.
Yeah.
Love will conquer all. I mean, Aaron Beck, the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, wrote the book Love is Not Enough. Love
Mhm.
is not enough, and it's not. It's helpful. Oh, trust me, it sometimes
Mhm.
makes the struggle worthwhile, but it's not enough.
Yeah. So Potash,
Hmm.
if I show you a magic trick and you don't know how it works, and then I show you how it works, then I have helped you, I've disillusioned you.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. I can
And
still
Okay.
appreciate the skill with which you produced these,
Yeah.
but yes.
No, and this is a side note anyway, but I will. This makes me random talk. It's like since I don't have anything, I don't know anything to say about relationships. I can say this. One of the things, and this goes back to my wife again. She taught me this. I couldn't figure out why some people would, when I was showing magic tricks in the old days, they would get pissed off at me. And I was showing people in the context of mental health settings, and she said they're getting mad at you because you're fooling them, and everybody in their fucking family has been fooling them ever
Mm.
since they landed on the planet. So I started watching that, and what I realized, and then disillusionment, Potash, was what I ended up doing as therapy. Because what I would do is I would show, and nowadays I'll show people a magic trick when I do my workshops and stuff. And then, as Alan knows, I teach them how to do it. And because that's the healing, that's the disillusionment is I'm gonna let you in on the secret. Um, and of course, there's Dan Griffin. You know,
I remember coffee. Do you remember the coffee you did with us? You
oh
came up.
yeah, I remember making the coffee disappear. Yeah, that's
Oh,
on videotape somewhere.
I got a video of it. I got to find see if I can find that.
But
That was
but
hilarious.
it but it was but Dee Dee was really right. It was interesting that people would because I
Yeah.
would I would actually ask for a while to learn that I would do a couple of magic tricks and then I would say how many of you don't like this and how many of you and say be really honest are kind of feeling angry whether you can explain it or not you know and it's like and it became a really good way of connecting to people saying like yeah people have not been honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, so
All right.
those are my thoughts on disillusionment.
Thank you. I'm so
I'm going
disillusioned.
to think more about what you've said today. I've made some notes here, and
All
I've
right.
got to think about what my version of that is.
All right. Sounds good. I'd love to hear
Okay.
that.
All right. Yeah.